Ryland Grady leaned back in his ergonomic office chair, fingers flying across the keyboard as he put the finishing touches on his latest consulting report. The San Francisco skyline stretched out beyond his window, a testament to the tech empire he helped build over the last decade. At 35, he was at the top of his game. He'd made millions thanks to his sharp mind and relentless work ethic, which had taken him from humble beginnings to the upper echelons of Silicon Valley. As he sent the email to his latest Fortune 500 client, Ryland allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. Another 7-figure payday in the bank. Not that anyone would guess it to look at him. His simple button-down shirt and jeans were a far cry from the flashy designer suits favored by many of his colleagues. His jeans and down were a far cry from the flashy designer suits favored by many of his colleagues. The battered Ford pickup in the parking garage stood out like a sore thumb among the sea of Teslas and BMWs. Ryland preferred it that way. He learned the value of humility and discretion from his mother back in Boise. He still remembered her exhausted face as she came home from another double shift. She'd come home from another double shift, and it was seared into his mind. They'd never had much, but she'd given him everything he needed to succeed. "You don't need to show off to prove your worth," she'd always said. "Let your actions speak for themselves." It was a lesson he'd taken to heart, even as his bank account had grown to eye-watering proportions. Was there any point in showing off wealth when it couldn't buy the things that really mattered? His phone pinged, interrupting his thoughts. It was a text from Kim. "Dinner at the Andersons tonight, don't forget." Ryland sighed. He could feel a hint of tension creeping into his shoulders. These dinners with Kim's friends always left him drained. He much preferred quiet nights at home with his wife, but she'd been pushing for more couple time lately. Probably another attempt to nudge him towards a more lavish lifestyle as he packed up his laptop. Ryland's mind drifted to the early days of their relationship. Kim had been a breath of fresh air, vibrant, ambitious, with a zest for life that pulled him out of his workaholic shell. He still got a warm glow when he thought about how enthusiastic Kim had been when she proposed, but lately that sparkle had dimmed. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but he felt restless. He got home quicker than usual, thanks to the light traffic in Silicon Valley. As he pulled into the driveway of their modest suburban home, he saw Kim pacing back and forth through the window. He could see the agitation in her movements, even from a distance. She was pacing back and forth on her phone. He barely had time to close the front door before Kim rounded on him. Her perfectly manicured nails were tapping in an impatient rhythm against her phone case. "There you are," she said. "I was starting to think you'd forgotten." Ryland raised an eyebrow. "I'm home." An hour earlier than usual, Kim waved a hand dismissively. "We need to leave in 30 minutes if we want to make it on time." The Andersons just moved to that new development in La Canada. "Remember, right, Ryland? I just need to grab a quick shower and change." His worn jeans and scuffed work boots. "Surely you're not planning to wear that ratty flannel shirt again?" "This is an important dinner. Reed Jason just made partner at his LA firm. We need to make a good impression." Ryland bit back a retort. There was no point in reminding her that his ratty wardrobe had never stopped him from closing multi-million-dollar deals. Instead, he simply nodded and headed for the stairs. "Oh," and Kim called after him, "Maybe we could take my car tonight. The truck is a bit conspicuous in that neighborhood." Ryland felt his jaw clench, but forced out a neutral, "Sure." Before disappearing into their bedroom, he tried to shake off the irritation. Kim didn't mean any harm. She just wanted what was best for them, even if her idea of best sometimes felt suffocating. 25 minutes later, they were cruising down. Ryland drove Kim to their meeting in his sleek Audi, which he'd bought on her behalf but registered in her name. He had to admit the leather seats were a lot more comfortable than his worn-out truck. Kim chatted animatedly about the latest neighborhood gossip, filling him in on who was feuding with whom and which couples were on the verge of divorce. Ryland made the appropriate noises of interest, but his mind was already dreading the endless small talk ahead. The Andersons' new home was exactly as ostentatious as Ryland had feared, a sprawling Mediterranean-style mansion. It was a style mansion perched on a hillside, complete with manicured gardens and a fountain gurgling in the circular driveway. He could practically feel Kim vibrating with envy beside him. "Can you believe this place?" she whispered as they walked up to the ornate front door. "Jason said they got it for a steal at only $8 million. "Imagine living somewhere like this," Ryland said. He chose not to point out that he could buy this house 10 times over without blinking. Instead, he plastered on a polite smile as the door swung open to reveal their hosts, Kim and Ryland. Melissa Anderson gave them both a quick kiss on the cheek. You could tell she'd been wearing expensive perfume. Her husband, Jason, was standing behind her, smiling. He had white teeth and a California tan. Melissa invited them inside. Dinner was almost ready, but Jason was just about to show everyone around. He said they had to see the wine cellar. It was incredible. The next hour passed in a blur of high ceilings, marble countertops, and all kinds of artisanal items. Ryland nodded and smiled at all the appropriate moments, but he couldn't help noticing the way Kim's eyes lit up at each new extravagance. You could see the longing in her gaze. Finally, they settled around an enormous dining table that probably cost more than some people's yearly salary. Conversation flowed freely, lubricated by bottles of wine that Jason was eager to show off. Ryland said between bites of Wagyu beef, "Kim tells us you're in tech consulting. How's business these days?" Ryland kept his tone modest. "I can't complain. There's plenty of work to go around in the valley." "I'll bet," Jason chuckled. "I bet you never thought about making the leap from consultant to founder before." Rand could answer. He said, "Oh, Rand's not really the entrepreneurial type. He likes the stability of consulting." There was a hint of disappointment in her voice. "Nothing wrong with that," Jason said smoothly. Ryland caught the prizing edge to his smile. "We can't all be risk takers." The conversation moved on, but Ryland found himself withdrawing further. He watched as Kim laughed too. Jason was joking around, and Kim was laughing along with him, her eyes sparkling like they hadn't in months. Melissa started talking about their upcoming trip to the Maldives, and Ryland saw the envy on his wife's face. It was almost midnight by the time they said their goodbyes. The drive home was quiet, and there was a palpable tension between them. Kim finally spoke up, her voice carefully neutral. "Did you see that kitchen? I bet Melissa loves cooking in there. Remember when we talked about remodeling our kitchen?" "It works just fine," Ryland said, perhaps a bit more sharply than he'd intended. Kim's lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm not saying it doesn't work, but wouldn't it be nice to have something a little more modern? We've been in this house for 5 years now. Don't you think it's time?" Ryland's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "We don't need an upgrade," Kim said. "We have everything we need," she added. "But what about want? Don't you ever want more than just getting by?" Ryland was taken aback by the question. "As if getting by is enough," he muttered. "We live in a $1 million house," Kim replied. Kim lived in a $5 million home in one of the most expensive real estate markets in the country. She drove a luxury car and had a closet full of designer clothes. How could she possibly think they were just getting by? Of course, she had no idea about the true extent of their wealth. Ryland had always kept his finances private, not wanting money to change the dynamic of their relationship. Now he was starting to wonder if that had been a mistake. The rest of the drive passed in intense silence. By the time they pulled into the garage, Ryland's patience was wearing thin. "I'm really tired. I'm going to bed," he said as soon as they were inside. "There's an early meeting tomorrow." Kim's face fell. "I thought we could talk about it tomorrow." "I'm really tired," he replied. He could feel a twinge of guilt at the hurt look on her face, but he pushed it aside. He needed time to think about how they'd ended up so far apart without him even realizing it. Sleep was elusive that night. Ryland tossed and turned, Kim's words echoing in his head. When he finally drifted off, his dreams were. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work and awkward conversations. Ryland threw himself into his consulting, taking on more clients to try to distract himself from the growing distance between him and Kim. She, in turn, seemed to be spending more and more time with her real estate colleagues, coming home later and later with forced smiles and vague explanations. It all came to a head on a quiet Sunday evening when they were having takeout, because neither of them had felt like cooking. The TV was on in the background, filling the silence that had become all too common lately. Kim said, pushing her food around on her plate. "Stacy's having a little get-together next weekend. It's just casual with some of the girls from the office. You don't mind if I go to you, Ryland?" He shrugged. "Why would I mind? You don't need my permission." Kim flinched slightly at his tone. "I know that. I just don't want you to think I'm avoiding you or anything, you know?" The words were out before he could stop them. Kim's eyes widened. "No, of course not. Why would you think that?" Ryland sat down, his chopsticks suddenly not hungry. "Come on, Kim. We've barely spoken in weeks. Every time I come home, you're either out or on your way out. What am I supposed to think? I've been busy with work, she said defensively. You know how it is. The market's been crazy lately, right? Ryland said flatly, because you've been so successful closing deals. As soon as the words left his mouth, he knew he'd gone too far. Kim recoiled as if he'd slapped her, hurt and angry. What's that supposed to mean? She demanded. Ryland ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. Nothing. Forget I said anything. No, I want to know what you meant by that. Kim pressed. Do you think I'm not working hard enough? That I'm just playing at having a career? Ryland protested. That's not what I said. Kim was on a roll. Not all of us can be big-shot consultants making 6 figures. Some of us are still trying to build something for ourselves. Ryland felt his temper rising. When have I ever said that? When have I ever made you feel like what you do isn't enough? You don't have to say it, Kim shot back. It's in every disapproving look when I talk about work. Every time you brush off my ideas for improving our life. God forbid we actually enjoy the money you make, instead of living like we're still struggling. College student, there's nothing wrong with living within our means, Ryland said tightly. Just because we don't show off every penny doesn't mean we're struggling, Kim. We live in a nice house in a good neighborhood, which is great. But you act like spending money on anything beyond the basics is some kind of moral failing. Would it kill you to want something more to actually enjoy life a little? I do enjoy life, Ryland insisted. I enjoy her life, at least I thought I did. Apparently that's not the case. Is this enough for you anymore? The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Kim's face crumpled into tears. Welling in her eyes, you know what? Maybe it's not, she said quietly. Maybe we want different things. Maybe we're not as compatible as we thought. Ryland felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. What are you saying, Kim? She stood up, wrapping her arms around herself. I'm saying I don't know. I need some. Ryland started to say, time to think, to figure out what I really want. But she was already heading for the door. I'm going to stay with Stacy for a few days, she said, not meeting his eyes. I think we both need some space to figure things out before we can move forward. Ryland could only stare at the half-eaten takeout container on the table in front of him. He sat there for a long time, lost in thought. He stared at the empty takeout container, wondering how things had gotten to this point. Part of him wanted to run after Kim and tell her everything about his real income and the millions sitting in offshore accounts. But another part of him, the part that remembered his mother's lessons about the true value of things, held him back. If money was all it took to make Kim happy, then making her stay was a marriage worth saving. The next few days passed in a blur. Ryland went through the motions at work. His usual sharp focus was dulled by the constant replay of their argument in his head. He found himself reaching for his phone 12 times a day, composing messages to Kim. He deleted them on the 4th day. He came home to find Kim waiting for him. Suitcase by her feet, Ryland's heart leapt for a moment, thinking she'd come to her senses. But the grim set of her mouth told a different story. We need to talk, she said. Stifled by their modest lifestyle, she'd watched her friends advance in their careers and upgrade their lives while she felt stuck in place. She'd come to resent what she saw as Ryland's lack of ambition. I can't do this anymore, she said finally. I thought I could be happy with a simple life, but I'm not. I want more. I deserve more. Ryland listened in stunned silence. Ryland was feeling a lot of different emotions. Hurt, anger, disbelief. But underneath it all, there was a cold, hard nugget of resolve. So that's it, he said when she finished. You're walking away from 5 years of marriage because I don't make enough money for you. Kim flinched. It's not just about the money, she said. It's about feeling like we're moving forward, like we're building something together. You're happy to just get by. I need more than that. Ryland nodded slowly, a plan forming in his mind. I see. And I suppose you think you'll find that somewhere else. I have to try, Kim said, not meeting his eyes. I'm still young. I have time to start over and find someone who shares my goals. Someone richer, you mean? Ryland said flatly. Kim's silence was all the answer he needed. All right, he said, surprising himself with how calm he sounded. If that's what you want, I won't stand in your way. We'll get a quick, clean divorce. No fuss, no muss. Kim looked up, startled. You're not going to fight this? Overnight millionaire, he watched the flicker of regret in Kim's eyes quickly replaced by determination. She nodded, squaring her shoulders. I'll have my lawyer draw up the papers. We can do this amicably, right, of course? Ryland said, his tone neutral. I'll have Carla handle things on my end. She'll make sure everything's fair. Kim's eyebrows rose slightly at the mention of Ryland's high. She has a powerful lawyer friend, but she didn't comment. Instead, she picked up her suitcase, hesitating for a moment. I'm sorry, she said softly. I do love you. I just don't love you enough. Ryland finished for her. I get it. Go on. Your new life is waiting. As the door closed behind her, Ryland let out a long, slow breath. He walked to the window and watched his Kim's car pull out of the driveway for the last time. A mix of emotions swirled within him, anger, hurt, and more. He felt a mix of relief and determination. He pulled out his phone and dialed a familiar number. Carla, it's Ryland. I need your help with something. How fast can you process a divorce? The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of paperwork and meetings. True to his word, Ryland kept things civil. He agreed to a modest settlement that wouldn't reveal the true extent of his wealth. Kim was eager to start her new life. She didn't push for more. During one of these meetings, Ryland overheard a snippet of conversation between Kim and her friend Stacy. They were huddled in a corner of the lawyer's office, speaking in hushed tones. I'm telling you, Kim, this guy is perfect. Ryland was surprised, but the speed of it still stung. The day the divorce was finalized, he found himself alone in the house he'd once shared with Kim. He wandered from room to room, memories pressing in from all sides. In the kitchen, he paused, remembering Kim's complaints about wanting to remodel. He suddenly felt a burst of energy and grabbed a notepad, sketching out plans for a complete overhaul. Why not? He thought. It's my house now. I can do whatever I want. As he worked, Ryland felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. For years he'd been holding back, trying to maintain a facade of modest success to keep Kim grounded. Now he was free. He could live as he chose and enjoy the fruits of his labor without guilt or explanation. His phone buzzed with a text from Carla. It's done. You're officially a free man. Ryland smiled. A plan was forming in his mind. He'd give Kim exactly what she wanted, a glimpse of the wealthy lifestyle she'd been craving. But by the time she realized what she'd thrown away, it would be far too late. He opened his laptop and started firing off emails to his financial advisors. It was time to start making some very visible investments. He'd let the rumors fly about the suddenly successful Ryland Grady. He'd make sure they reached Kim's ears, but always secondhand, always just out of reach. As night fell, Ryland stood at his window. He raised a glass of whiskey and looked out over the Silicon Valley skyline, silently toasting to new beginnings, sweet revenge, and the lesson Kim was about to learn the hard way. He had no idea the wheels of fate were already in motion across town. Kim was on her first date with Nate Cole, dazzled by his charm and apparent wealth. She had no idea of the house of cards she was walking into, or of the storm brewing on the horizon. The Horizon's phone buzzed again with a news alert about a rising star in the tech world. He smiled, a cold, determined glint in his eye. The game was on. Weeks had passed since the divorce, and Ryland found himself settling into a new routine. His days were filled with work, and his evenings brought a quiet satisfaction of finally living life on his own terms. The kitchen remodel was well underway, and he'd started making strategic appearances at high-end events. Profile, tech events, building his new public image. One crisp morning, Ryland was enjoying his coffee on the patio when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his eyebrow raising at the unfamiliar number. Curiosity got the better of him, so he answered. Ryland Grady. His voice was neutral. Ryland, the voice on the other end said, sounding shaky and uncertain. It took him a moment to place it. Kim, he said. He fought to keep his tone neutral. To keep the surprise out of his tone, he said, What do you want? I can. We can talk. Please, I need to see you. The desperation in her voice was palpable. Ryland's first instinct was to hang up, but a cold curiosity took hold. This could be interesting. He said, Fine. The cafe on 3rd Street. 1 hour. He arrived early, choosing a table with a clear view of the entrance. Right on time, Kim walked in, and Ryland had to stifle a gasp. She looked terrible. Her hair was disheveled, She had dark circles under her eyes. Her designer clothes were wrinkled and unkempt. This was not the polished, ambitious woman who had walked out on him. Kim slid into the seat across from him, hands fidgeting nervously with her purse. "Thank you for meeting me," she said softly. "I messed up. Everything's falling apart. Nate, he's not who I thought he was. We're drowning in debt, and I just missed the stability we had. I miss you, Ryland." Your eyebrows shot up. "Stability? That's rich coming from you. Our life wasn't too boring or too modest for your tastes, was it, Kim?" She flinched. I know, I was stupid. I thought I wanted all that flash and excitement, but now I realize I just wanted to be loved." Ryland pressed on, his voice hinting at steel. He'd thought she'd come crawling back, welcoming him with open arms. But he'd been wrong. He'd hoped she'd come back, but he didn't know what he'd hoped. Tears welled up in her eyes. She'd made the biggest mistake of her life, walking away from him. Rin studied her for a long moment. Part of him was proud to see her so broken, but mostly he felt nothing. The woman in front of him was a stranger. He had no desire to know Kim. "I make $1.5 million a year," he said slowly. Kim's face drained of color. "No way, you never told me that. You never told me anything." Ryland cut her off. "You left without ever really knowing me. You left without ever bothering to look beyond the surface." Kim's mouth opened, and then she closed up, looking like she'd been slapped. "But why didn't you ever say anything? Why did we live so modestly?" Ryland's laugh was without humor because money isn't everything. "Kim, I thought you understood that once. Clearly I was wrong. We can fix this, can't we?" Kim leaned forward, voice trembling. "I was wrong. I was so stupid. I just didn't know. Please, R, give me another chance." Chance looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the desperation, the regret, and he felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, just a sense of weariness. "You already made your choice, Kim." He said it quietly, but there was no mistaking the conviction in his voice. "I'm not a second option. I'm not a safety net. And I'm certainly not a fool." Before Kim could respond, a man's voice cut through the tension. A well-dressed man was approaching their table. Even without an introduction, he would have guessed this was Nate Cole, the flashy watcher. Nate's white smile had made it pretty clear that he was new money and had made some bad decisions. Kim's eyes widened in panic. He started getting noticed in the industry, with profiles in publications and whispers of his success spreading through Silicon Valley like wildfire. It was at one of these events that he met Chloe Adams, who was giving a presentation on innovative software development techniques. Ryland found himself captivated not just by her ideas but also by her down-to-earth. After her talk, he approached her at the networking mixer. He said, "Impressive presentation," and offered his hand. Ryland Grady shook Chloe's hand firmly and smiled. "Thanks," he said. "I was worried I'd put everyone to sleep with all that technical jargon." Ryland chuckled. "Far from it. Your ideas on agile development are fascinating. I'd love to hear more about how you're implementing them in real-world scenarios. You're putting them into practice in the real world." They fell into an easy conversation, talking about work and swapping industry stories. Ryland was surprised to find himself genuinely enjoying the interaction. It had been a long time since he'd connected with someone on an intellectual level like this. As the evening drew to a close, Ryland found himself reluctant to end the conversation. "Listen," he said. I know this is a bit forward, but would you like to grab coffee sometime and continue this discussion in a less corporate setting?" Chloe tilted her head, considering. "I'd like that, but full disclosure, I'm not interested in climbing any corporate ladders or latching onto the next big thing. If that's what you're after, I'll save us both some time." Ryland felt a genuine smile spread across his face. "Chloe, you might be the most refreshing person I've met this year." Our coffee date turned into dinner, which turned into long walks where we discussed everything from coding philosophies to favorite books. Ryland found himself opening up in a way he never had with Kim, sharing his background, his mother's influence, and his real feelings about wealth and success. In turn, Chloe shared her own story, her passion for coding, her desire to make a difference in the world through technology. She told him her story, about her passion for coding, and her desire to make a difference in the world through technology. She was brilliant, kind, and refreshingly unimpressed by displays of wealth. Before they knew it, weeks had turned into months, and Ryland realized he was happier than he'd been in years. He and Chloe complemented each other perfectly, challenging and supporting one another in equal measure. One lazy Sunday morning, as they were relaxing on Ryland's patio, enjoying breakfast. Chloe brought up a topic they'd been avoiding for weeks, so she said, setting down her coffee mug, "Are we going to talk about the elephant in the room?" Ryland raised an eyebrow. "Which elephant are you talking about?" Chloe rolled her eyes. "The one where you're clearly a secret millionaire but you live like a normal person. I love that about you, but I'm curious about the story there." Ryland was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. Then slowly he began to tell her everything about his childhood, about Kim, about his decision to keep his wealth private. When he finished, Chloe reached across the table, took his hand and said, "Thank you for trusting me with that. It can't have been easy, Ryan." She gave his hand a little squeeze. "That's how I know this, sus. It's different, it's real." Chloe smiled, her eyes twinkling mischievously. "Well, in that case, I have a confession to make too." Ryland's heart skipped a beat. "Oh, I've been secretly hoping you'd offer to fund my startup idea," she said, her expression serious. Then she burst out laughing at Ryland's shocked expression. "I'm kidding." "God, your face." Ryland joined in her laughter, feeling lighter than he had in years. This was what he'd been missing all along, not just a partner but a true equal. Someone who saw him for who he was, not what he had. As their laughter subsided, Chloe's expression turned thoughtful. "You know, all joking aside, I do have some ideas for socially responsible tech initiatives. I'm not looking for handouts, mind." "You know, if you ever want to collaborate," Ryland said, "I'd love to hear about them." He held out his hand, and Chloe took it, her smile radiant. Meanwhile, across town, Kim's life was unraveling at an alarming rate. The cracks in Nate's facade were turning into gaping chasms, and she found herself trapped in a nightmare of her own making. It started with little things, like Bill's arrival. Marked final notice hush phone conversations that ended abruptly when she entered the room, but soon the truth became impossible to ignore. "What do you mean the business is failing?" Kim's voice echoed through their penthouse apartment. "You said we were doing great." Nate paced the room, running his hands through his hair. "I thought we could turn it around. The investors were supposed to come. But now what?" Kim demanded. Nate's shoulders slumped. "Now we're broke. Worse than broke. We're in debt up to our eyeballs." Kim felt the room spin. This couldn't be happening. Not again. But the cars, the apartment, our lifestyle. All smoke and mirrors. Nate said bitterly, "We borrowed the cars. I thought if we looked successful, we'd become successful. Fake it till you make it right." She sank onto the couch, head in her hands, and said, oh God, what have I done?" As the days passed, their situation went from bad to worse. The penthouse was repossessed, the cars were taken away, and they moved into a tiny apartment in a part of town that Kim had once turned her nose up at. She tried reaching out to her old friends, but word of their downfall had spread quickly. Doors that had once been open to her were now firmly shut. Even Stacy, who had introduced her to Nate, wouldn't return her calls. Desperate, Kim tried to restart her real estate career, but her reputation was in tatters and no one was willing to take a chance on her. One night after another fruitless day of job hunting, Kim found herself staring at her phone, Ryland's number glowing on the screen, a beacon of hope in her darkening world. Her finger hovered over the call button. "Don't even think about it." Nate's voice startled her. He stood in the doorway, eyes hard. "You made your choice, Kim. You're with me now, for better or worse." Kim looked at him, really looked at him. The charming, confident man she'd thought she married was gone. In his place stood a bitter, angry stranger. "Is this really what you want?" she asked softly. Nate's laugh was harsh. "What? Since when? Does what we want matter? This is what we've got. Kim, you'd better get used to it." He just stalled out of the room. Kim turned back to her phone with trembling fingers. She pressed call, and it went straight to voicemail. "You've reached Ryland Grady. I'm unavailable to take your call. If this is a business matter, please contact my assistant. If this is a personal call, well, you probably shouldn't have this number." Kim's breath caught in her throat. His voicemail sounded different, confident, successful. Everything she'd once thought she wanted, Ryland had. She whispered into the phone, "I'm sorry, I was wrong about everything." Please, please call me back. I need help. She ended the call, tears streaming down her face. But deep down, she knew there would be no rescue, no second chance. She'd made her choice, and now she had to live with it. Across town, Ryland's phone buzzed with a missile notification. He glanced at it, saw Kim's name, and without a moment's hesitation pressed block. "How are you doing?" Chloe asked, looking up from her laptop where she'd been working on their latest project. "Great," Ryland said, smiling. "Everything's perfect." He turned back to their work and felt the last vestiges of his old life fall away. The future stretched out before him, bright with possibility. For the first time in a long time, he was excited to see where it would lead. Ryland sat in his home office, typing away on his latest project. The warm glow of success surrounded him, a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing elsewhere in Silicon Valley. A knock on the door interrupted his focus. Chloe poked her head in, a concerned look on her face. "Have you seen the news?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. Ryland leaned back in his chair, stretching. "No, I've been buried in work all morning." Chloe walked in, tablet in hand. "It's about Nate Cole, Kim's new husband. His company just filed for bankruptcy. It's all over the tech blogs." Ryland smiled coldly. "That's unfortunate for him." Chloe studied him closely. "Ryland, you wouldn't have had anything to do with." Ryland met her gaze steadily. "Let's just say I made some strategic moves in the business world. If those moves impact Mr. Cole's company, well, that's just the nature of the game, isn't it, Ryland?" Chloe said, her tone a mix of admiration and concern. It was pretty rough on him. He couldn't get the funding he needed to keep his business afloat. Chloe's eyes widened. "That's ruthless," she said. Ryland turned to face her. His expression was hard. "It's business," he said. Chloe Cole was running a scam, taking advantage of people who wanted a flashy lifestyle. He just picked the wrong mark this time. It had nothing to do with the fact that he married your ex. Wife, Chloe pressed. Ryland's laugh was without humor. "Oh, it has everything to do with that. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Kim made her choice. Now they both get to live with the consequences." Chloe was quiet for a moment, processing. Then she nodded slowly. "I get it. I don't know if I agree with it, but I get it. Just be careful. Okay, don't let this consume you." Ryland's. His expression softened as he looked at her. "I won't. This is the end of it. I promise. From here on out, it's all about our future across town." Kim paced their small apartment. The phone was pressed to her ear. "What do you mean there's nothing left?" she hissed. "There has to be something." The line was crackling with a defeated and angry voice. "It's gone, everything. The business, our savings, were wiped out." Kim felt the room spin and collapsed onto the worn couch, her free hand clutching at her hair. "How could this happen? You promised me we'd be set for life." "I thought we would be," Nate shouted back. "But someone's been working against us." Kim was blocking every move and cutting off every lifeline. It was like they knew exactly where to hit us. Kim got a chill as she thought back to her last conversation with Ryland. The cold look in his eyes when he revealed his true wealth made her think he could have Nate. She said slowly, "I think I might know who's behind this. Ryland, my husband, has more money and influence than I ever realized. He's not the forgiving type." There was a long silence when Nate spoke again. His voice was low and dangerous. "You're telling me this now after everything's gone to hell. Jesus Christ, Kim. What else don't I know about you?" The line went dead. Kim stared at the phone in her hand, tears welling in her eyes. How had it all gone so wrong? Days passed and their situation grew increasingly desperate. Bill collectors called constantly, and the refrigerator stood empty more often than not. Kim found herself doing something she never thought she'd have to do again. Scanning the Nate was looking for a job, and he wanted Kim to help him find one. She was sitting at their kitchen table, reading the newspaper, when she saw an ad for a position that would only take her out in the evenings. Nate came home and started yelling at her. He told her to pack her bags and stormed off to the bedroom. Kim followed him, wondering what was going on. Nate was upset and lashing out. "We're leaving tonight. I've got a lead on a fresh start in Louisiana. An old buddy of mine says he can get us set up." Kim's heart raced. "Leave? But what about our lives here? Our friends, our Nate, world on here?" Eyes blazing. "What friends?" What life? It's all gone. All because of you and your rich ex. Kim recoiled as if she'd been slapped. That's not fair. I didn't know. You should have known, Nate said angrily. You were married to the guy. I was such an idiot. I thought I'd landed a meal ticket, but instead I got stuck with a clueless gold digger who couldn't even pick the right mark. The words hung in the air between them, ugly and raw. Kim felt something inside her snap. Is that all I am to you? She asked quietly but firmly. A hand through his hair. No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean that. I'm just scared. Kim, everything's falling apart and I don't know how to fix it. Kim shook her head and smiled sadly. No, Nate, we're not. We never were. We were just two people using each other to get what we thought we wanted. But it's time to face reality. This us. It's over. Nate stared at her for a long moment, then, without another word, he zipped up his suitcase and walked out the door. Kim threw herself into job hunting with a desperation born of true need. She swallowed her pride and took a position as a receptionist at a small real estate firm. A far cry from her dreams of being a top agent. But it was a start. She downsized even further, moving into a tiny studio apartment in a less desirable part of town. Every day was a struggle, but slowly she began to rebuild. One afternoon, as she was walking home from work, she spotted a familiar figure coming out of a high-end restaurant. Restaurant Ryland looked great in a tailored suit, laughing with a group of well-dressed executives, and on his arm a woman Kim didn't recognize, pretty in an understated way. Her smile genuine as she looked up at Ryland. Kim felt a pang in her chest, not of jealousy exactly, but of regret for what might have been. She watched as Ryland helped the woman into a waiting car, his hand lingering on her back. He looked happy, truly happy in a way Kim realized she'd never seen him before. Before she could stop herself, Kim called out, "Ryland!" Ryland turned his eyes, scanning the street, and then looked at her. The warmth in his expression cooled instantly. "Kim," he said, his voice neutral. Kim approached cautiously, suddenly aware of her shabby work clothes and scuffed shoes. "I saw you," Ryland said, and his eyebrow raised slightly. "I'm doing well," Kim replied, forcing a smile. "Really well, in fact." Ryland nodded, his expression unreadable. "I heard about Nate's business troubles." It's a shame that the lack of sincerity in his voice was so obvious. Kim felt a flicker of anger. "Did you have something to do with that?" she asked, her voice low. Ryland's smile was cold. The tech world can be cutthroat. Kim, Nate should have done his due diligence before trying to play with the big boys. "You ruined us," Kim hissed. "Was it your plan all along to watch us crash and burn?" "I didn't ruin anyone," Ryland replied calmly. You let the consequences of your choices play out. You wanted flash and excitement, Kim. Well, this is where that path led. Kim, I made a mistake. I know that now. I'm sorry for everything." For a moment, something flickered in Ryland's eyes. It was a hint of the man she'd once known. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by cool indifference. "Your apology is noted," he said flatly, "but it changes nothing. You made your choice. Kim, you have to live with this choice just like I've had to live with mine." "Ryland, please," Kim pleaded. "I'm struggling and I could use some help just to get back on my feet." Ryland's laugh was without humor. "Oh, from me? I'm not your safety net. I'm not your second choice. I'm not anything to you anymore, and that's exactly how I wanted to stay." He turned to go but then paused, looking back at her. He gave her a word of advice. "Stop looking for someone else to solve your problems. Stand on your own 2 feet for once. It might be good for you." He walked away, leaving Kim standing alone on the sidewalk. The gap between their lives was never more apparent. Back at home, Ryland found Chloe waiting for him. She looked concerned. "I saw you talking to Kim," she said softly. "Are you okay?" Ryland sank onto the couch beside her, suddenly feeling drained. "Yeah, I'm fine," he said. It was strange seeing her like that. Chloe took his hand. "Do you regret it? What you did to Nate's company?" Ryland was quiet for a moment, considering. Then he shook his head. "No. I don't. They made their choices. I just made sure those choices had consequences." Now Chloe was looking at him, really looking at him. He saw concern in her eyes, but also understanding and love. Real, unconditional love. "Yes," he said firmly, "it's over. Kim, Nate, all of it. That's the past. You're my future. Chloe, you and the life we're building together. Chloe smiled, leaning in to kiss him softly. Good, because I've got some news. Ryland raised an eyebrow. Oh, Chloe's grin. I remember that socially responsible tech initiative we've been working on. Well, I just got word we've secured full funding. We're good to go for launch. Ryland felt a genuine smile spread across his face. This was what mattered. Not revenge, not old wounds, but creating something. It's going to make a real difference, he said, pulling Chloe close. We've got work to do, he added, as they bent over Chloe's laptop, excitedly discussing plans for their new venture. Ryland felt a sense of peace settle over him. He'd faced his demons and come out stronger on the other side. The pain of the past was nothing compared to the bright future ahead. He'd learned his lesson, paid his dues, and now it was time to truly live. Months later, Ryland sat in his home office, sipping coffee as he scrolled through the morning news. He saw a small item, a notice of foreclosure on a small apartment in a rundown part of town. The name on the notice was Kimberly Bowers Cole. Ryland's finger hovered over the trackpad, tempted to dig deeper. But then he heard Chloe's laugh from the kitchen. He smelled breakfast cooking and realized he didn't care anymore. He closed the browser window and stood up, stretching. It was a beautiful day full of possibility, and he had far better things to do than dwell on the past. He joined Chloe in the kitchen and pulled her into a warm embrace. Ryland knew with absolute certainty that he'd made the right choice. This was his second chance, his new beginning, and he wasn't going to waste a single moment of it.